Srila Prabhupada wrote that I am the only one in India who's openly criticizing not only impersonalism and demigod worship, but anything that falls short of complete surrender to Krishna. My Guru Maharaj never compromised in his preaching, and I never compromised in my preaching, and similarly none of my disciples should compromise in their preaching. And we must declare boldly to the world that Krishna is the supreme Godhead, and they should not foolishly dream of peace unless they are prepared to surrender to Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So I felt I got my answer from Srila Prabhupada, and it was an important instruction. Another important instruction, which came back in Calcutta, when we had the first Calcutta Panda. The first big Panda we had was in Bombay. It was very successful, and I could go back to that, but for now. And after that, Srila Prabhupada sent Tamal Krishna Goswami and me to Calcutta to put out a Panda program there. And so I noticed that Srila Prabhupada more or less preached the same way, and I just had this thought that, you could preach that Krishna consciousness is whatever, the perfect social system, the perfect philosophy, the perfect economic program. And Srila Prabhupada replied that, unless someone actually experiences Krishna consciousness, they won't be able to appreciate its value. So then, later in his room, and this is what I wanted to come to, I said to Srila Prabhupada, now you're here with us, and everything is going nicely. But what if in the future, when you're not here, ISKCON falls from the standard? And Srila Prabhupada replied, you are also one of the important members of the society, which I didn't think I was at that time. But anyway, he said, you are also one of the important members of the society, so you work for the correction, but don't weep. And I've also taken that as a very important instruction. And I think it applies to all of us, really, not just to me. So, yeah. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, Maharaj. Just sitting next to you, I feel privileged. Thank you. I mean, being on the same planet as you in this lifetime, something like that. And it's really nice to be with all of you. So important. We live in cities and towns, and the idea is people like to live close to one another. Because we get a lot from each other normally. Sometimes there's a sense of isolation. I know in the suburbs, people don't break bread that much together. They go in their own little house, and then they get in their own little car. They sit in their own little cubicle somewhere. And it's possible to be amidst people and still feel isolated. And it's very important for the human spirit to come together and share realizations and also console one another, because the human experience is fraught with many emotional traumas and trials of many kinds. And so it's important to support one another. So to have this kind of community is vital, because oftentimes people do come together, but they're not really sure how to console one another. They give platitudes that, okay, it's going to be all right. And then one might think, well, you're not going to be all right. So how is your saying I'm going to be all right? Very helpful. The ideal situation is to have a community where the idea is to be oriented towards one's real self. That we're not our physical bodies or mental bodies, which bears repeating because it does seem like we are, doesn't it?
Yes.
In fact, in Srimad Bhagavatam, one of the great saints of all time, Devahuti, had mentioned to her spiritual master, who was also her son, that it really does feel like I am my body and mind. And it seems like I've been like this eternally and probably will be forever. And he gave such an encouraging answer to her. He said, it is possible to overcome that. He said, it takes time. In fact, he said it takes a long time. And one should go on serving and hearing. And of course, when we're in association with others that are doing devotional service and also hearing about Krishna, then it becomes an encouraging atmosphere. So a few experiences I've had recently. My wife and I, this is my wife Niranakula, Devi Dasi, she joined Krishna consciousness when she was in her teens, like 16, 17, and came from New York City and took off to California, because that's what you did back then, circa 1972, and ended up meeting the devotees in Northern California and accepting an invitation to go for a short visit over the weekend to the Los Angeles community, or otherwise known as New Dwarka. How many of you have been there? It's on Vaisesika Avenue, not too far from Venice Beach. And then she didn't leave, nor did her friends. We met, I became a devotee in 1973. Had an intense desire to answer questions about life, especially why I had to die and why what I was doing was important if I did have to die, and minus a lot of details. I came in contact with Srila Prabhupada's teachings through his books. And although I had read many books, his were very clear and helpful to me and answered my questions so completely that I wanted to further my association with the author. And then at that time I was aware of the Hare Krishna movement because I grew up in the Bay Area around San Francisco from the East Bay. But I used to go into Berkeley a lot because my parents worked there. And I used to see the devotees chanting Hare Krishna on the UC Berkeley campus, Sproul Plaza. And then I was able to join the temple in San Francisco. So I lived also in an ashram for 13 years, and then at age 29, I decided to get married, and I was introduced to Nirakula Devidasi, who lived in Los Angeles and was engaged in service. And then when we got married, we started our own ashram, home ashram, called like Grihastha ashram. Means we don't live in the temple, but we live outside, but keep the same principles. And it was a revelation to me that you had to pay for stuff. Because I never did. I grew up with my family and depended on their good graces. And then when I left, I was 16 and I joined the ashram and lived for another 13 years, simply, but I never had any money, nor did I have a bank account or any evidence that I existed. Which took a lot of work because I realized there was a lot you had to do to establish yourself in the world. A little thing called credit. And I won't go into all the details of how I was able to establish credit, but we did. And Nirakula and I found that living on the outside of the temple grounds and conducting ourselves, doing the same kinds of things that we had learned in the temple, was helpful. One of the ways it was helpful is explained in a verse from the Sri Upanishad that says, Vidyam cha yas tad vedo bayam saha avidyayam ritum tirtva vidyayam ritum ashtante. I'm smiling because there's devotees here who know me, and they quote it a lot. And it says, only one who can understand nescience and transcendental knowledge side by side can transcend the influence of repeated birth and death and enjoy the full blessings of immortality. And we've found in our lives of living a life in which we are integrated with the world, so to speak. You know, we own a house and we've had businesses. We're both retired now, and we've interacted with our families in various ways. I didn't grow up in a particularly religious family, but my family celebrated Christmas pretty vigorously. And after I had reestablished a close relationship with my family, then Christmas things had to go on, and Nirakula took care of all that. I had no idea what kind of gifts we were giving people, but she figured it all out and made it seem as if I was a lot more engaged than I was. But there are so many interactions that we have with our families and with the world, and at the same time maintaining our practice that Srila Prabhupada had taught us, that we learned from living in the ashram, was, I'm trying to look for the right word, it was edifying. We felt quite certain. It reminds me of a kind of glue that my father used to get that always confounded me when I was a kid. It was called epoxy. And you had to buy 2 tubes. And of course you may not know this because now there's super glue. But you had, one wasn't helpful without the other. You had to combine the two. And you had to do it. I was just thinking, why don't they just do it for us? And I'd say, no, you have to do it now, just before you apply it. The combination of the two is what did it. And we've found what has been written in the Bhagavad Gita and other of the literatures we've taken for guidance, and what the great saints have said. It doesn't matter where you live and under what circumstances, as long as you keep the transcendental vibration going. There's a song by Bhaktivinoda Thakur where he says, Grihe tako pani tako shada hari boli tako, which means it doesn't matter if you live in a house or the forest, as long as you keep the essence, the sound vibration. And that brings me to my last point, which is, just recently, one of the devotees in our community, which is in Silicon Valley, and had contracted cancer, and then there was a downward spiral, and she ended up in hospice. And so we went, lots of us, there was nice space in the room at Stanford Hospital. And when we went there, being around someone who's leaving the world can be awkward. For those who haven't cultivated spiritual life. In fact, Krishna says it in the Bhagavad Gita, that those who have studied the science of Krishna consciousness aren't bewildered, not only when they leave, when somebody else leaves, what to speak of when the person, him or herself, leaves. They're not bewildered by it. And what I found was in that environment, there were various family members coming, and some of them weren't oriented towards Krishna consciousness. And so what we did was we chanted. And in fact, I brought my drum. And I was bringing it into the hospital. It's kind of a quiet zone, isn't it, usually? And here's some, person clad like I was and am, lugging in a big drum. We got in the room and she was subdued, and then when I started playing the drum, she opened her eyes and looked over to see what was going on. And it reminded me when we were in India at a big festival at a holy place called Radhakund. And we had a big group, but they were all divided in getting there, and so we started a kirtan, it's the crowd. But the first group, we only had some little kartals. And the kirtan had some impact, but it didn't attract the crowd and have a deep effect until the drum showed up. So when we got in the room, I started playing the drum, and then the devotees started chanting the Maha Mantra, we had a sense that that was the right thing to do. Not only for the devotee who is preparing to leave her body, but everyone around, even the attending hospice nurses who would come in. They had a way of nodding their appreciation and telling us how this was a unique environment that we had created in there. And I could see that there's nothing else you can do to create such a unique environment except to take to the chanting. And then she passed, and then there was a funeral. And that was even more diverse. More people came from different communities because she had been integrated in various, in her profession and family members and friends and things like that. So funerals are really awkward because what do? Are you supposed to be super sad? Are you supposed to be helpful? Should you sit, stand? When should you sit, stand? Everything, it's a little bit tenuous, the whole situation. So at a certain point, because we also brought the drum there, and there were quite a few devotees, somebody had requested, could we chant? So I started chanting, and at first it was low voice, and the chanting spread throughout the entire room. They were like pews, kind of. And then gradually, you could feel that all of the angst in the room started to dissipate, and people felt more sure about themselves and about what to do. And it reminded me of what it says in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita Janaya Yashavairagyam Jnanachayarahaitukam, which means if you just perform devotional service, and the most direct way you can do that is by chanting, then there's a natural way that you'll be infused with a higher perspective. And the things that were causing you anxiety and confusion then dissipate. And it's very practical. And that works in all the aspects of life. There, I saw it very dramatically against the backdrop of hospice and funeral. And then thinking back into our lives in the myriad situations in which we feel overwhelmed. Does anybody ever have that sense of feeling overwhelmed just because you have so many things to do? People you have to answer?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I won't get into it because I don't want to cause panic. A stampede to go home and get on the internet. But whatever it may be, there's a way that the very simple but profound process of chanting Krishna's names synchronizes all the right energies at the right time in the right place, and you don't have to think about it, you just have to do it with devotion, and then everything else happens. And it also reminded me how well vetted the system is. There's a word, nirvitam, which comes out in one of the famous verses of the Bhagavatam, etam nirvitimananam ichitam akatobhayam. Yoginam nripanirnitam harirnamanukirtanam says, this is good for everybody. Doesn't matter where you live, you don't have to be a monk, you can be a mechanic or a doctor or anything. But if you chant Hare Krishna, it'll work in all times, places, and circumstances. And if it works at a funeral or in a hospice when somebody's leaving their body, think how well it could work in any ordinary situation in your life. So it's one of the tenets of bhakti, and I can say that in our journey through life together, by keeping that as the constant, we've been able to work and associate with all kinds of people, travel to different places, and go through educational circumstances, and everything becomes rectified and improved by chanting Hare Krishna. That's my finishing statement, and that's, I think, the main point I was trying to make, is wherever you are, whatever you do, if you chant Hare Krishna, it'll make your life better. And it's something that a person in class the other day said after describing many esoteric points. He said, if you have a steady process of chanting Hare Krishna every morning and maybe reading a little bit from the Srimad Bhagavatam, then you'll feel better. And I was thinking afterwards, it's such a simple statement, but it's practically impossible for anybody to feel better in this world. It's the hardest thing to do. People want to take medicine and then you get about 30 seconds describing what the medicine is and what it will do for you, and then 2.5 minutes describing how bad it is for you. And that's symbolic of all the different situations in our life. Everyone's trying to feel better, but they never quite do. So chanting Hare Krishna is the way to not just feel better, but to thrive in the world and be able to integrate everything that one does so that we have a kind of enlightened engagement with the world, and it doesn't matter what your profession is or who you are, what your current situation is, it'll just work. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
We're going to do one question.
Better be good.
And I think what we're going to do is Giriraj Maharaj is going to answer a question, and then Vaisesika Maharaj is going to lead a kirtan. So that's the scheduled events. So who's got a question for Giriraj Maharaj? Don't everybody raise your hand all at once.
When you're, I'll get back to your question in a minute. When you were talking about the support of the community, I thought of I think Protector Swami saw it on a signboard, but he quotes it quite a bit, and it's nice. That friends multiply joys and divide sorrows.
Oh, that's nice.
Yes.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you for a wonderful talk. And my question is, when you're speaking to regular people, how do you know when to be critical and when to not be critical?
Maharaj, I'm going to add to that question. Because I saw everybody was chickening out from raising their hand to ask a question. I thought I'd ask you a question. And very similar to what Kumi said, Srila Prabhupada, at least from everything I've read and heard for my entire adult life, he was quite strong and fierce, even. As was Tamal Krishna Maharaj, your best friend for so many years. You, in contrast, have also, I've seen since I was a kid, a very mild personality. And you do show your displeasure in certain ways, but you tend to be quite reserved and not loud and in your face, not particularly contrarian. In fact, you have a much more conciliatory personality. I'm wondering how you were so attracted to someone like Srila Prabhupada or Tamal Krishna Maharaj or people like that who are very, very strong and forceful in their presentation when you seem to be quite meek and mild in your presentation. And please feel free to correct me and chastise me for whatever misunderstanding I have. I'm
Severely.
very happy. I'm happy to be setting myself up.
Well, I didn't really see it as a question of hard or soft. I just saw it as a question of what was appropriate for the audience at the time. And although it does remind me of one incident. After a walk on Drew Beach with Srila Prabhupada, we were walking back to the temple, and Srila Prabhupada said, when we gain control of the government, we will approach everyone and say, chant Hare Krishna, or we will kill you. So everyone was like laughing, everyone was really happy, except for me. And Srila Prabhupada looked at me and said, oh, our Giriraj is non-violent. and I also have the spirit laugh. But then later I came across, I think it's a Chaitanya Bhagavat, something like that. Chant Hare Krishna would kill you. So it wasn't right. But yeah, I love Srila Prabhupada, and I was, held Tamal Krishna Goswami very dear, and sometimes they have the same, like, good cop and bad cop. So Tamal Krishna Goswami and I made a preaching team. One was like a good cop and one was a bad cop. And we were quite effective. Yeah, there are many nice stories about when we would go out and preach and raise funds. But yeah, Tamal Krishna Goswami was very, I'd say, more on the pragmatic side, and I was more on the idealistic side. And Srila Prabhupada saw us as a good combination, a good team. In fact, towards the end, he executed a power of attorney in favor of Tamal Krishna Goswami. So I think...
The two of you?
Yes.
The two of you together became his power of attorney?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, I think... Yeah, I mean, I could tell many incidents when that combination worked effectively. But it was a good combination. And yeah, I'm very grateful that Srila Prabhupada engaged me in service with him. And yeah, we were able to do some service for Prabhupada. I briefly mentioned the first Calcutta Panda, and Tamal Krishna Goswami told me, you make all the money and I'll spend it. Okay.
And Maj, Kumi's question was, when should you?
When preaching, I think it's a delicate balance of being critical and also speaking the truth. How do you find that balance? Or where do you lay that line?
Well, it would depend on the audience and how ready they are to receive criticism. I mean, when Prabhupada would preach in a large gathering, as he said in his letter, I criticize not only impersonalism and demigod worship, but anything that falls short of complete surrender to Krishna. But we have to judge our audience and give them the right amount. Not too much is not good, and not too little is not good. And this was especially when I was distributing literature, but I would always pray for the super soul in my heart to guide me to say the right thing. And I would pray to the super soul in the potential customer's heart to inspire them to take the literature and do some service. But yeah, once Srila Prabhupada said, it's a great art to criticize, And then he said, unfortunately, you do not know that art. So, yeah, and he gave an example.
Maharaj, forgive me, but how epic of a demonstration of the art of criticism than to say to somebody, but you do not know that art. It's so
Yeah, that's right. So he gave the example that that you could say that the tree is dead. That's one way of putting it. Or you could say the tree, which is so full of beautiful limbs and branches and foliage, has lost its juice. They both say this, come to the same point, but one is more tactful, more positive than the other. So, okay.
There's another example of. There was a morning walk when a gentleman was asking Prabhupada. He seemed a bit out of breath, and he had caught up to the walk, and he was asking a few questions. And one of them was, why are there so many different religions in the world? And Prabhupada answered, it is not difference, it is variety. And everyone was satisfied, including the man, and it cut such a clean, it made such a clear idea of how to think a little differently, just by the way he put it. It's sort of a similar expertise to, take you to a different category. We'll lead a short kirtan.
yeah.
Okay.